Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. Um, I live in New York now. It is a privilege to work with you and discuss with you on this important topic. And I want to thank you again for the invitation. I live in New York. Uh, I've been living here for 15 years now, and I've been living in the United States for 30 years. This August, uh, next month, as a matter of fact, is going to be my 30 years of living in the United States. So just want to give you a little bit of my background before I start talking on the actual subject, uh, so that you know where I'm coming from. So I grew up in Kolkata, in a very poor and humble background in North Calcutta, and then I did my bachelor's and master's from the University of Calcutta, and then started teaching in a very remote rural college in what we call the Sundarbans in South 24 Parganas, where it's an absolutely impoverished place. Uh, I started teaching in a college where there was no electricity, no running water, and then no road. So that was my first and only work experience in India. And then I taught there for 4 years from 1981 to 1985, and basically started the Department of Botany from scratch. So I was the first uh, recruitment for the Department of Botany, and I started the department basically from zero. So after working there for 4 years, I decided to leave and um, decided to come to America to do my PhD. So here, from 1985 to 1992, it took me uh, almost 7 years to do another master's degree from Illinois State University, and then a PhD degree in plant biology from Southern Illinois University. So after doing that, obviously I was a scientist, so I looked for a job in science. So I did a whole bunch of jobs as a postdoctoral scientist and then as a researcher and teacher at various American institutions. But then I decided to quit science because I was not happy. Also in India, uh, I do not want to get into too much details on it, but your organization and Biju Matthew in particular has known me for a very long time, and he knows about my political activism background in India. And Biju has been a great friend, a wonderful person. I feel privileged to have known him. In any case, in 1999 I quit science, and then I went back to school. In America, they call universities school. So I went back to school and did journalism master's degree from Columbia University here in New York City, which is a very well-known university, as you know. And then after graduating from Columbia University, having a degree in journalism, I started working first as a journalist and then as an activist. So at that time, the unfortunate incident of 9/11, September 11th terrorism happened, here in New York City, right in front of our eyes. And I became very deeply involved to work for the immigrants in New York and elsewhere. Immigrants who were going through a very, very difficult time because of the terrorism that they had nothing to do with, but just because they were poor and many of them were Muslim or Sikh, they were very heavily uh, oppressed. Their human rights were violated. They were being picked up uh, in the middle of the night from their homes and detained in various prison centers across the country. And then there were a whole bunch of hate crimes also on poor immigrants, not just Muslim immigrants, even though Muslims were really the highest recipients of the crime, of the violence, but Sikhs and other nationalities also were the subject of violent hate crime. So that was my beginning of a new career here in America, where I became a grassroots immigrant rights organizer working against hate crimes. So after doing that, um, I was hired by a labor college because I was also working with various labor unions and human rights organizations. So Labor Union College hired me as their labor educator back in 2007. And from 2007 up until today, I have been working as a labor educator on one hand, that is my primary job, and then also as an immigrant rights advocate, working on human rights and civil rights of immigrants here in America. So that is my background, and I thought it would be important to introduce myself to you that way, because otherwise you wouldn't know where I'm coming from. So then basically I've come in touch with many different activists, not just from India, but from all over the world. And here also we are involved with, as I said, with the labor movement and the immigrants' rights movement. But then I'm also involved, and my wife is also involved with the peace movement, the anti-war movement. So this is a very different career. Not too many Indians can understand very well, because they all think that America is only about making money. And the more money you make, the more successful you are. And many people, they actually tell us that we have wasted 30 years of our life here in America because we have not become millionaires yet. So, but we are very happy to do what we are doing without being a millionaire. We are very happy and satisfied doing the work that we are doing. So this is important for me to tell you, because many Indians, particularly young generation Indians today, they have no idea that this type of a life is at all possible. And they do not even know that these careers exist, and they actually can be even called careers. Anyway, so that is just a quick introduction. As far as today's discussion, Mohit and Naeem and Lamakaan have invited me to talk a little bit about the economic crisis in Greece and its global impact and its connection particularly with India, I guess, because you are all in India. And I think that because I live in America, and I know that many of my American friends are also very interested to hear this talk, I think that they also need to understand that the Greece crisis is not just about Greece, but or about India, but it's also about countries such as the United States of America. So that's one side of it, to talk about the disaster and to make a connection with other disasters happening all over the world, including here in the United States and back home in India. But then also, then the question remains that what can we do? Are we just onlookers without any ways to do something about it? Or we, as the ordinary men and women, wherever we live, we actually have a role to play, so that it is not just their game and we are just spectators or audience of that game, like a cricket match that the players are playing on the field and the spectators are sitting in the gallery, either clapping or cheering for the players, or if the players are not doing so well, we can basically jeer at them and blame them, but we have no role to play. Is that how we want to live the rest of our lives, or we want to do something about it? Do we have a part to play in this game that the people in power call democracy? If it is truly a democracy, and India and the United States happen to be two largest democracies in the whole world, so if we live in a democracy, then do the people, the ordinary people, have any role to play in this democracy, or we are just mere onlookers with no role to play? That is something that we need to discuss as well. And one thing I must tell you uh, is that, as I have already explained my educational background and my activism background to you, I am not really a hardcore economist. So many people, people who are watching this or hearing this, sitting in the audience, uh, they probably know much more than I do about the hardcore economics aspects of it. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm an economist and I can tell you about all the nitty-gritty aspects of the economic side of the story. I'm not going to take that angle, and I do not want to pretend as if I know it all. I do not know it all. I have many questions myself, and I have many unanswered questions too. What I'm going to tell you is about the overall nature of the crisis and why is it important for us to learn about the crisis. Why do we have to bother about what is happening in Greece today? Because what can we even do if we learn a lot about the economic disasters happening in Greece? Why do we care? Because we do not live in Greece. Many of us, most of us probably won't ever have a chance to go to Greece to see the old ancient civilizations and their relics and their museums and their ancient tombs and temples and things like that. We can never be there. I have never been there. So why do we even care? We do have to care because mainly the media everywhere, all over the world, they are actually hiding many of the facts from us. They are not telling us what exactly is going on. They are telling us only a story that they like to tell their way. It fits their program and their politics. That is how they are telling us the story. They are not telling us the story as it should be told, without any secrets. And we need to know what exactly is going on in Greece today and its relationship to the ordinary people, men and women in India, in the United States, and all over the world. So let me just begin by telling you something that I often tell my labor union students. That is the economic neoliberalization, what they call now neoliberal economics. And neoliberal economics actually started particularly here in the United States and by default in countries like India. When in 1980 Ronald Reagan became the president of the United States, and Margaret Thatcher, more or less at the same time, became the Prime Minister of England. What happened at that time was that before there was, particularly in countries such as the United States, there was an economic system that they called the Keynesian system. And the Keynesian system was developed by a British economist named John Maynard Keynes, um, whose economic policies were picked up by President Roosevelt here in America after the Great Depression. So we just want to go back on history a little bit because many people simply do not know about this history. So back in 1930s, early 1930s, when America had an economic catastrophe called the Great Depression, at that time, uh, uh, President Roosevelt became the president, elected president of the United States, and then he made some serious policy changes. And what he did was that he did a number of things. Number one, he came out with very strong regulations for the banks and for the corporations. That was number one. So from a privatized, completely privatized, out of control economy, he actually decided to change the economic system to a regulated economic system without having to resort to socialism, because America does not like the word socialism, let alone communism. So he could not. Nobody said that he was a socialist or a communist, even though some right-wing groups, they always complained that he was doing too much of socialism. But anyways, so he actually came out with a very strong regulations for out-of-control banks and corporations in the private sector. So that was number one. Number two, he actually changed some laws or brought about some laws that strengthened the labor unions of America. That was number two. Passed some pro-labor laws, some pro-working people laws that were extremely important at that time. And his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, was also a very progressive woman, and she was highly instrumental to be in charge of some of the important social and economic programs here in America. So that was number two. Number one, economic regulation, and number two, strengthening of the labor unions. Number three, what he did back in those days was that he put imposed taxes on the richest of the rich. So the taxes were increased so that the richest of the rich could share their profit and their income with the uh, country's treasury, so that that money could be used for important programs such as education, such as health care, such as transportation, public transportation, such as Social Security, which is a program for particularly for the old age people here in the United States. They put in a substantial amount of money every single month through their work, and when they are 65 years of age, they get that money so that they can use that money that they have saved themselves. So that is what is known as Social Security, is a social safety net for particularly for the old age people here in America, and many other countries also have a similar program. And number four, what he did was President Roosevelt did was that he created a lot of benefits and welfare for the poor people. So these were the four pillars of an economic system which was modeled after John Maynard Keynes. That is why it's called the Keynesian economic system. And this particular variety of programs that President Roosevelt created was known as the New Deal. This New Deal program was in place from 1940 to 1980 for 40 years. Was also known as the heaven, you can call it the heaven for the middle class, for the ordinary people, working men and women. And it was also a time when they called it the golden age of American capitalism, when both Republicans and Democrats, they became presidents of America, such as after Roosevelt died, while serving on his fourth term, then they had Truman as a president. Then they had Eisenhower, who was a Republican. Roosevelt was a Democrat. Eisenhower became the president. Then after Eisenhower, they had other presidents. Then they had John Kennedy, as we all know, as a Democratic president. And they had Nixon, who was a Republican. He became the president. Then after that, Jimmy Carter, who was a Democrat, became the president. And so all these presidents, both Republican and Democrat, they all followed the New Deal economic principles, and America became stronger and stronger, particularly the ordinary people. And then came 1980 when Ronald Reagan became the president, and he basically turned everything upside down. And that was the time when they started this new pro-rich economic principle, economic policy that they also called Reaganomics. So basically what it did was that it completely destroyed the New Deal economic policy and went to a policy that is now known as the Hayekian policy. John Hayek was a Dutch economic scientist, and then basically both Margaret Thatcher in England and Ronald Reagan in America, they followed a particular school that followed John Hayek's Hayekian economic principles. That is, the school is now known as the Milton Friedman School of Economics. They came out of Chicago School of Economics, very conservative, very pro-rich, and they turned the economy upside down. So this history is important because unless we know the history, we probably wouldn't understand what is going on in Greece or India or United States right now. So that was a quick historical background of the global economics. And then in the 90s, when the Soviet Union fell, the capitalists, the corporations, and their politicians such as Reagan and such as Thatcher and their followers, they got a huge opportunity, and they basically, instead of limiting the restructuring of their economic systems in their own countries, they actually went all over the world, taking advantage of a newly opened up world, a new globalization they call it, and they basically started implementing those policies all over the world. And that was the time when India had first, after the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi, when Indira Gandhi was murdered, then that was really not just from an Indian political point of view, it was a disastrous incident, but also from an Indian economic point of view, it was a huge disaster, because that was the first time when a completely political neophyte like Rajiv Gandhi was made the Prime Minister of India. And then Rajiv Gandhi's Reserve Bank governor, chairman at that time was Manmohan Singh. And Manmohan Singh became India's Prime Minister, as we know, and he remained as India's Prime Minister for a long time. And at that time, all these different governments, after the demise of Indira Gandhi, all these different Indian governments, they actually followed the line of this neoliberal economics that I mentioned about when I began this talk. So basically, all over the world, in India, in the United States, in Greece, and all these countries, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Ireland, Argentina, all of these countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, you name it, they all went through this type of a complete overhaul of their economic system, and they all went from a pro-people um, uh, mixed economic system where they had capitalism, but they also had strict regulations so that the corporations and banks, they could not go out of control. So from this type of an economic system, they all went to a neoliberal economic system where it was all privatized. So here in America, as you perhaps all know, practically the entire economic system is now privatized. Banks are all private, healthcare systems, the hospitals and clinics, they are all private. There are many schools that are completely private. And what we have seen in the United States since 1970s or 1980s or even 1960s, that is something that we are seeing in India today. So India, even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, was not so extremely privatized. We had a mixed economic system. Our banks were not private. We had public government banks, well-regulated banks, such as State Bank of India, such as the United Bank, such as the you name it, United Commercial Bank, all kinds of banks that in India, they were all public banks, government regulated, government banks, government institutions. But now, Indian public banks are dwindling, and private banks that have come from outside, they are flourishing. And now we see HSBC, and now we see Bank of America, now we see Citibank, now we see Chase, and all kinds of private banks, ICICI, they are all functioning in India with practically no regulations at all. So this is happening in India. In Greece also, they have taken advantage of an economic turmoil, and what they have done is that they have destroyed, they have given out bad loans, billions of dollars of loans to Greek banks, and Greek banks worked with international banks, particularly banks such as Goldman Sachs, and they have taken advantage of the Greeks' political turmoil. And what they have done is that they have joined hands with a very, very important organization, that is International Monetary Fund, or IMF. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about IMF because many people do not know what IMF is all about. International Monetary Fund has a loan awarding program. So they are supported, they are funded by the richest countries, the G8 countries in particular, the top 8 economically prosperous countries, of which United States is the #1 most powerful country, and it actually funds IMF the most. And then we have countries such as Germany and France and United Kingdom and Japan. So these G8 countries, they have always funded the International Monetary Fund. And what IMF has done is that they have gone from country to country that are lagging, that are not doing so great, and they have given them loans, billions of dollars in loans. But in order for these countries to receive the loan, they said that they have to make some serious changes on their economic and political system. So the 4 or 5 different changes, they call it a structural adjustment program, a structural adjustment. By the way, people who are listening, they can always double check on my facts, and they don't have to believe every word that I say. They can go back online or go to the library and do some research on these things. And I would be very happy to hear back from you if you have any questions or if you need any clarification. So going back, So IMF has said that, well, if it's Greece, for example, or if it's India, for example, or if it's Argentina, for example, they have said that, okay, or Malaysia, Indonesia, we are going to give you billions of dollars in loan, and then take this loan, and in 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, you will be able to turn around your own lagging economy, and you will be fine. But you have to make these changes. What are these changes? Number one, you deregulate your economy, privatize your economy, make your electricity private, make your healthcare private, make your education system private, make your banks private, make your rail private, railroads private, make your public transportation private. Everything should be privatized. There should not be any government control. That's number one. Number two, they say that you lower taxes on the rich individuals and corporations. So, such as in case of India, Ambani or Adani or Tata or these people or Infosys or all these Wipro, all these different largest corporations, they do not have to pay their share of taxes, or they can minimize their taxes. Reliance, all these different corporations. In case of the United States, General Electric, Exxon, Apple, some of the largest corporations on earth that make billions of dollars in profit, they don't have to pay any taxes, because they say that if you cut taxes on them, they'll spend more money on the economy and the economy will spar. But that never happens. They just get the tax breaks and they become more rich and they make more profit. That is exactly what happens. So this is happening in India, this is happening in Greece, this is happening in the United States. So these are two changes. Number three, cut all the benefits and all the welfare systems that you had for the poor and the middle class. So they call it austerity. I think that many of you have heard about this term, austerity. So austerity is tightening your belts. So that means that you had benefits for the poor, you had some healthcare subsidies, you had pension is a big thing. You have saved all your life, you have saved through your 20 years or 30, 40 years of your work, working for whatever company or bank or whatever institution you worked for. You saved up money and you were able to get pension after your retirement. But now IMF says that the pension should be drastically cut because your country is going through some very serious economic turmoil. So you cannot really afford to pay pension or these benefits to the poor or to the middle class. So that's what they call austerity measure. Food subsidies, such as children's meal at their schools, all kinds of welfare programs and benefits, they should be cut, drastically cut. That is what they have done in Greece. And then number four, they said that deregulation of the economy, privatization of the economy, cutting taxes on the richest of the rich, and number three is, as I said, cut all the subsidies and start an austerity program. Number four, they always said that labor unions were causing a lot of problems. They are demanding too much. So we need to get away with labor unions. We do not need labor unions. So that is their fourth pillar of their economic system, their structural adjustment program. And number five, they said that you must cut the value of your currency. So I'll give you one example. When I left India 30 years ago in 1985, the Indian currency, Indian rupee, was 10 or 11 rupees, actually 11 rupees per one US dollar at that time. And now it is 65. 65 Indian rupees is one American dollar right now. So that is just one example how the currency has devalued. So basically what it means in simple language is that if I was the Indian government and I was not doing so well, and if I took $1 billion at that time from IMF, then they said that you make these changes to your economic and political system, and in 30 years, in 2015, you will be able to pay us back your $1 billion plus the interest. And they also put a very high interest rate on their loans, such as 8%, 10%, 15% of interest, which is unthinkable. Anyway, so I was the Indian government and I took that $1 billion, and then in 30 years I worked very hard and I made all these changes to my economic and political system, and I saved up enough money to pay back that $1 billion plus interest to IMF. So in 2015, after 30 years, I go back to IMF and I give them $1 billion and the interest. But they say that no, that is not enough, because in the meantime, in these 30 years, we have actually cut the value of your currency 5 times or 6 times. So now you do not owe us $1 billion in interest anymore. You actually owe us $6 billion. Okay, this is very simple. Many people do not understand it, so I'm just trying to make it very, very simple. So now Indian economy, people who are always bragging about how great the Indian economy is and how prosperous India is right now, of course it is prosperous, but it is only prosperous for a handful of people. It is only prosperous for the people at the top, for the Tatas and for the Ambanis and for the Adanis and for Infosys and Wipro and all these big banks and corporations. For them, it has become extremely good, because that is what happened in Greece, and that is what happened in India, and that is what happened in the United States. Because of these strange and anti-people and cruel economic programs, the ordinary people have become weaker and weaker and poorer, and the rich have become richer and richer, and the income inequality has become wider and wider. So that has happened in Greece, that has happened in India, and that has happened in the United States. So in the United States, where I live, there is now practically a very almost non-existent middle class. You are either rich or you are either poor. Either you're rich or you're poor. And that is the situation in the United States. But of course, mainstream media, whether in India or in America, they won't tell you that side of the story. So that is a big problem, because people only hear about America as if it's all like, as they say, the streets are paved in gold. But in America, the situation is anything but that. America, over the years, especially over the past 20 or 30 years, in many cases, on many different fronts, America has almost become like a third world country. Here people are working very, very hard. Many people are doing 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. There was a time in America when only one person in the family, normally the man, because that was, I'm not even supporting that only the man should work and the woman should sit at home. I'm not saying that. I'm all for the equality of women. I think women should work more and they should be exactly the 50% of the society. But having said that, the tradition was that just like in India, the man would go out and work, and the woman would stay at home and take care of the family. But now Americans cannot afford to do that. Both the man and the woman are working outside, not because of choice necessarily, but because of compulsion. And still they're having a very hard time to make ends meet. Almost all the American families, they are completely in debt. They have no savings. They are in so much debt that their cars, their houses, and everything else that they own, they are all on borrowed money, not on their own money. And in India, they are following the same type of an economic system, unfortunately. So Manmohan Singh has done that. He was actually the director of the International Monetary Fund of the India region before he became the Prime Minister of India. India's current president, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, who comes from my state, West Bengal, he also was the director of the India Region International Monetary Fund. when he was also the finance minister of India. So if a finance minister or a prime minister is directly recruited by the International Monetary Fund, whose interests are they serving? Mr. Chidambaram was also like that. So this is happening in India. So Manmohan Singh's government followed the IMF dictates, and they made huge structural adjustment programs in India, implemented in India. And a result of that, India has gone from a very regulated economic system to a completely deregulated, privatized economic system. India has gone from, like I said before, 11 rupees per US dollar currency value to now 65 Indian rupees per 1 US dollar currency value. India has destroyed its healthcare system for the poor. If you go to a hospital in India or a school in India, if it is a private public hospital, it's a government hospital, nobody even goes there anymore unless you're extremely poor. People will go to, at least in most parts of India that I personally know, for example, in Calcutta, the Calcutta Medical College was one of the best hospitals in India not too long ago. And now Calcutta Medical College, after this complete deregulation and privatization, Calcutta Medical College now is one of the poorest hospitals in Calcutta, and it has happened only in 30 or 20 years. Nobody wants to send their children to a government school anymore because government schools are all falling apart. They have no money. People all send their children to private schools now, private colleges. So within a span of only 20 or 30 years, the Indian economic system has gone from a completely regulated system to a completely deregulated, privatized system. And now that the BJP government has come to power, they are following exactly the same economic policies that the Manmohan Singh government carried forward for their 10 years. And not just that, the BJP government is actually doing more to make it even more privatized. And this is the first time in Indian history when all the biggest corporations, all the richest individuals, some of them I mentioned before 2 or 3 times, they have all come forward, and in a joint statement, they actually asked people to vote for Narendra Modi's government when they ran for election last year or the year before. This never happened in India. The private corporations and the richest people, they always supported the people in power, whether it's Indira Gandhi or whether it's Atal Bihari Vajpayee or whether it's Narasimha Rao or Rajiv Gandhi. But nowhere in Indian history they have come forward in such a blanket statement to support a particular political party in India. This has happened for the first time in Indian history since 1947. So India is going through a very serious situation. India's current finance minister, Arun Jaitley, actually wants even more deregulation and more privatization. And he has actually talked to Raghuram Rajan, who is now India's Reserve Bank of India's governor, and also happens to be a very important personality for IMF. Even Raghuram Rajan is having some problems with Arun Jaitley and the Modi's government, because Modi's government wants more privatization, more deregulation, more cutting of welfare and benefit, more austerity, more tax cuts for the rich. But Raghuram Rajan, even being an IMF person himself, he is actually resisting that. Very recently, just following Greece, Arun Jaitley actually prescribed more interest cut. So for example, if you are still saving money in India's banks, then you are still getting a good amount of interest. Maybe somewhere it is 8%, somewhere it is 6%. If you have fixed deposit, then you maybe even have 9% or 10%, which is a substantial amount of interest. Unlike the United States, where we have absolutely no interest, it's practically American banks are not giving any interest whatsoever to the people who save their money in the banks. So, for example, if I have $1,000 saved in my bank, I practically get no interest whatsoever. I just give my money to the bank so that the banks can invest the money to make more profits for themselves. But I get no returns at all. And in India also, they are trying to follow the same thing. They're trying to cut interest rate on Indian people's savings, so that now if you are getting 6% or 8% interest, Arun Jaitley is trying to make it 4% or 2%. I don't know about the exact rate that he's prescribing, but this is what he's asking for, along with the support from Indian corporations, richest of the rich, and multinational corporations who are now basically who have taken over the Indian economy. So, following their dictates, following their demands, Arun Jaitley and Narendra Modi's government, they are actually prescribing a deep cut on people's bank interest rate, and it is going to happen, even though Raghuram Rajan is resisting on that for the time being. So this has happened in Greece, and this is going to happen in India sooner or later. So if this is the situation in Greece, where people are, there is like almost 40% unemployment, 40 to 50% unemployment. The situation in Greece is such that children who go to school, they are actually fainting in school because they didn't have breakfast early in the morning before they came to school. It's not much different from what we see in some poorest parts of India. I don't know much about Hyderabad because I've never been there. I want to go there to meet you and to talk to you, and to go to Bangalore and some other places to give out this type of a talk when I come to India next December. I come to India at least once or twice every year, and I go from place to place to speak to people and to let people know what is going on in the world, and particularly in America, and why that knowledge would be important for the Indian people, particularly young men and women. So I do that all the time. So I would like to do that. But I have never been there in Hyderabad so far. But I've heard that Hyderabad is perhaps a little different. It's a little bit more prosperous than places such as, I don't know, such as, Calcutta right now is in a very serious situation. West Bengal in a very serious situation. Some parts in Rajasthan, some parts in Madhya Pradesh, in Chhattisgarh, in Bihar, some other areas. They are extremely poor, but Hyderabad, I think, is a little better. That's what I have heard. But I have my doubt that if you go outside of Hyderabad to rural areas in Andhra Pradesh, you will find a similar education or similar healthcare or similar prosperity for the people who live in the rural areas of Andhra Pradesh. I have deep doubts about that. I think you will find out that the situation in urban areas in India and situation in rural areas in India are two complete different worlds. So Hyderabad, what you see Hyderabad may not be so necessarily true in other parts of Andhra Pradesh or now Telangana also. So this knowledge is important because it gives us a global picture, it gives us a global perspective about an economic story that we normally do not necessarily know very well, number one, and number two, media never ever tells us this story from this point of view because they do not want to displease the people who actually own them. And today, all the media organizations in India are owned by big corporations. There is no neutrality as far as the media is concerned. Whether it's West Bengal's famous newspapers or TV stations, or whether it's Delhi's or Bombay's or Tamil Nadu's or Hyderabad's, there is absolutely no difference. Either the media organizations are directly owned by big corporations, Indian corporations, such as Reliance owns, I know for the fact that Reliance owns many different media organizations, television networks, and online networks also. and online networks are very popular with, particularly with younger Indians. So they are taking over online media outlets as well. But whether it's an Indian corporation that owns the media, Indian media, or it's a multinational corporation such as ABC, such as ESPN, India Star TV now has collaborated, if not merged, with ESPN and ABC's Disney's other networks. Disney owns ABC and Disney owns ESPN, and ESPN is one of the most popular sports networks in the entire world, here in America and also in India. Most of the cricket matches, ICC World Cup, or everything, T20, they're all now aired by ESPN. Many of them are. So this is a situation where the media is not just Indian media anymore. It is really a part of the global conglomerate. And they have no interest to tell you the real story from an ordinary people's point of view. They only tell you the story as it fits their own political agenda, so that people do not know what exactly is going on and how the International Monetary Fund, how the World Bank, how the American government, and how the Indian government, they are destroying the country beyond recognition. So this is something that you need to understand. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to tell you about some of the aspects, because I keep talking to my students here in New York, many of whom are very well educated and politically savvy people, and they have been lifelong members of an important labor union, but even they do not know what exactly is going on. So when I first tell them about IMF, when I first tell them about Greece, when I first tell them about Monsanto, how Monsanto farmers are committing suicides in very large numbers in India, which media almost never tell us. They never really describe. And recently, an Indian agriculture minister actually has said that Monsanto, the farmer suicides in India are not because of Monsanto or their predatory loans, but because these farmers have some type of a sexual or other personal problems, and that is why they are committing suicide. This is something that he has said recently, which is unthinkable. Which is unthinkable. This is like, first of all, it is anything but true. It is a lie. And number two, it is such a cruel statement that hundreds of thousands of farmers are killing themselves out of economic desperation, and because of Monsanto's GM seeds and GM food and their predatory loans of that they're giving out to these poor farmers, loans that they cannot ever pay back. And now they're saying that these farmers are killing themselves not because of the loans. That is such a cruel statement. If this comes out of the mouth of an Indian national agricultural minister, then you can imagine what kind of compassion they have for the poor farmers and the poor people all over India. So this is exactly what is happening in India today, and this is exactly what is happening in Greece today. Goldman Sachs actually made millions of 300 or 400 millions of dollars, basically breaking the Greek economy. They have actually laundered money in a very clandestine, secret way. That money changed hands from one group of rich people to another group of rich people, one group of rich banks to another group of rich banks, and basically destroying the economy in the middle and impoverishing the Greek people even more, so that now they have no breakfast for their children and they have 50%, 40% unemployment, and then serious violence on the street. And once violence erupts on the street, then they have their police and then they have their military with their guns drawn, and they will do anything to stop the violence on the street. But the violence on the street does not happen because people want to be violent. Violence only happens when people are completely frustrated and desperate, and they have no other way but to take it out on the street. Violence, the real violence, if there are the real violent people are the big banks and the big corporations and the governments who are colluding. It's in Greece, whether it's in India, or whether it's in the United States of America or any other country. If you go back and read up the history, recent history, 20 years ago, a history that happened unfolded in Indonesia and Malaysia and Thailand and all those areas very close to India, then you will find out how the IMF and World Bank, along with big banks and corporations, they have destroyed their economy. And they destroyed their economy so fast that it actually spread like a virus. And they actually, because it spread like a virus, the economic disaster spread like a virus, they actually call it a contagion, as if it's a spread of a virus. It went from country to country, from Indonesia to Malaysia, from Malaysia to Thailand, and all those places, they were all destroyed. Similarly, they destroyed Argentina back in the 2000 and 2001. And they have done the same thing in many other countries. So this part of the talk, I will actually end by quoting something that Malaysia's Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, Dr. Mahathir bin Mohamad said at that time. He said that there was a time, I'm just paraphrasing it, he said that there was a time when colonizers would colonize a country through violence at gunpoint, just like the British came to India and colonized India by violence. And then the next 200 years, they destroyed India, they looted India, they took all the gold, and they made a very rich, prosperous, happy country. In 200 years, they transformed it into a very poor, a very difficult, internally conflicted country with a huge, huge inequality between the rich and the poor, and a huge conflict between the Hindus and the Muslims, and all kinds of things. So in 200 years, they have done that. So Mahathir bin Mohamad said that there was a time when the colonizers would come, particularly European colonizers would come, and they would colonize a country by violence at gunpoint. But they don't have to do that anymore. They go to any other countries, they take advantage of problems in their economic system, and with their structural adjustment program, with their IMF and G8 countries and their World Bank and their WTOs, they change the economic system of the country. And by changing the economic system of the country and putting the country in so severe debt that the country cannot get out of the debt anymore in many generations. So what we see now in Greece, what we now see in India, what we have seen in Argentina, what we have seen in Indonesia and Malaysia, what we have seen in the Philippines, these countries are in so much debt that they are completely colonized by foreign powers, particularly the G8 countries such as the United States, UK, Germany, and these countries. They have completely colonized India and Greece and Argentina and Malaysia and the Philippines and all these other countries without even shedding a drop of blood. So this is what they call neo-colonization, or the new form of colonization, where you can colonize a country and colonize their people and then completely enslave them and indebt them for many generations to come. And my fear is that what we are seeing in Greece now and what we are seeing in India now, it is going to spread throughout the world. And the big powers, particularly the American and European powers, they are out there to recolonize the entire world for their own resources and for their own profit. And by doing that, they have created an extreme inequality where the poor is getting poorer and the farmers are killing themselves, and the factory workers have no jobs, and the poor students, they have no breakfast in school, and the healthcare system is falling apart, and the banks are being completely taken over by multinational corporations. So this is a situation, this is not a very pleasant situation, but this is the real situation, a story that mainstream media would never tell you, and that is the reason I took advantage of this talk and gave you our side of the story. Our side means the poor people, ordinary people's, 99% people's side of the story. And my only suggestion, I have worked with Professor Noam Chomsky and some other people over the years, and my only advice is that regardless of this left and right divide, if all the ordinary men and women of India and Greece and America, they can come together and form a large, broad-based coalition, regardless of their political differences. That is the only way to fight back against the economic terror. I really call it an economic terror, an economic fascism. And unless we come together, it is going to be very difficult for us if we still keep fighting along the left and right lines. There is no left and right divide. The only divide is the divide between the 1% and the 99%. I'll stop there. Thank you very much for your time.